Welcome everybody to this fascinating section around hydrogen. And the topic of today is hydrogen, the matchmaker of the energy system. And personally, I think it's probably one of the most interesting developments we have seen in the past 24 months, the rise of hydrogen, the green hydrogen as a cornerstone, I would say, for the energy transition. But before giving some opening remarks, I would really like to thank Uniper for sponsoring this session. They have kindly approved to be the host of the session. So Uniper, thanks again, and with Mr. David Bryson with us, I think that's a good reflection of that. So coming back to the topic. Hydrogen has been on the agenda many years ago. It was a bit disappearing, and now suddenly it's back like never before, and it has a strong position in every, I would say, green deal, local green deals that we can see at the moment. But still, I think we have many questions open in terms of how are we going to scale it? What needs to be done on the supply side? What needs to be done on the demand side? What's needed in terms of regulations? What's the infrastructure play that is needed? So all these topics will be covered today. We have a very senior and esteemed group of panelists with us, so I think we can touch every part of the value chain and every part of the issues that I've just raised. I will introduce the panel to you later today or this hour, but let me start to introduce you our first keynote speaker, Mr. David Bryson. David is Chief Operating Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer at Uniper. And the fact that Uniper is combining these two roles, being the COO and the Chief Sustainability Officer, I think is a very clear statement of the direction that Uniper is taking. So, David, without further ado, let me give you the floor for some opening statements on this topic.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today to discuss the topic of hydrogen in an EU setting. As you all know, hydrogen is very much the hot topic at the moment, and I want to tell you about Uniper's ambition in this regard. Ambitions which are important not just to the future of our company, but I feel very much for the energy transition itself as a whole. So allow me to elaborate. I mean, we all know that politicians set targets and define frameworks, and companies such as ours are expected to deliver the solutions within those for the future. And we at Uniper really want to be part of the solution, and therefore we've set ambitious decarbonisation goals. We have the ambition to achieve carbon neutrality in our European fleet by 2035. And over the next 3 years, we'll invest around 1.2 billion euros in low carbon and CO2 efficient technologies. And hydrogen will play a pivotal role in the transformation of Uniper. In the course of the next decade, we want to invest more than €1 billion into the growth of Uniper's hydrogen business. That's production, storage, trading and optimization. It's in these areas that our expertise lie. In that regard, we strongly welcome the European Commission's efforts to support the development of hydrogen. The European Hydrogen Strategy kick-started these efforts together with the launch of the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. And as a member of the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance's roundtable for hydrogen production, I'm really pleased to see that industry and EU policymakers working hand in hand. For the European Alliance to be a success, cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, and technological neutrality should be at the core of the discussions. The important projects of common European interest, or IPCEIs as they're known, are a key landing point for us, and they will help a large number of projects to get off the ground and reach scale. At Uniper, we've answered calls in Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden. Perhaps with regards to the German IPCEI programme, I could highlight two of our flagship hydrogen projects. First, Green Wilhelmshaven. It's a receiving terminal we intend to build for green ammonia with an ammonia cracker. and connection to the future hydrogen grid in Germany. Accompanying that, a 400 megawatts electrolyzer to supply industry on site and also connecting to that hydrogen grid. Powered by green power via power purchase agreements, which we have, or hopefully as well with direct connection to renewables at a later stage at the harbour of Wilhelmshaven. A really exciting project on the base of a coal-fired power station we've regionally submitted and will be closing in the next year. And then Hamburg-Moorburg. We supported the expression of interest of HH2E with regard to this project, Zukunftskraftwerk Moorburg, so the future power station at Moorburg, which aims at using surplus wind power to produce heat for a high temperature storage facility, which can then be used in the surrounding area, as well as hydrogen via electrolysis at the site of a retired power station. Two really exciting opportunities. There are only 2 of 7 projects we'll be putting via the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance call. We have more in the pipeline. And as a member of that alliance, I will do my best to contribute to solutions in order to make the strategies become a reality. But I think we should be under no illusion. The hydrogen challenges are significant, both in terms of regulatory, but also with regards to costs and scale. And ahead of the discussion with the colleagues who will be joining in a moment, let me merely say this. I think in order for us to achieve our ambitions, we will need to be pragmatic and open to all technological opportunities. Our focus should lie on CO2 reduction when it comes to production. Let the market determine the rest. When it comes to technological leadership and Europe sustaining its front runner position, let's ensure we have the right mechanisms in place which incentivize early movers and the necessary demand side pull. It's a great opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really looking forward to our talk in the next few minutes. So thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back to you, Itze.
Thank you, David, for your introductions. And I think there's a lot to unpack in everything you just said. And the good news is we have a good group of people here together to go through all these points. So let me introduce you the panel. With us today we have Alfred Hofmann. Alfred is Managing Director of Vattenfall Europe Windkraft. He's also Vice President for Portfolio and Business Development at Business Wind, Area Wind, and representing Vattenfall in this panel. Next to Alfred, we have Mrs. Mady van der Laan. Mady van der Laan is President of Energy Netherlands, and that's the Dutch Energy Association of, I would say, all the companies representing suppliers, traders, and retailers in the Netherlands. And Mady is a former minister of the Dutch government. Next to that, we have Michael Liebrecht with us, and Michael is a good known friend of Eurelectric. Michael is analyst, advisor, and investor in the future economy, and also host of the Cleaning Up. He's chairman of and CEO of Liebrecht Associates, and he's the former founder of and senior contributor to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. So, Michael, welcome you too. Next to that, we have with us Joaquim Nunes de Almeida. Joaquim is the Director for Mobility and Energy-Intensive Industries within the European Commission, representing the European Commission with us today. So welcome also, Joachim, to you. And finally, we have Walburga Hemmetsberger. Walburga is CEO of Solar Power Europe, representing the solar industry in Europe and giving the sound of the real renewable, I would say, companies in this studio. And of course, we have David with us, which was already earlier presented. Myself, my name is Wietse Kastra. I'm a managing director at Accenture, and I'm responsible for utilities and energy transition business across Europe. So it's a privilege to be hosting this roundtable. So in order to have a bit of structure, we agreed with everybody to structure the conversation in three main topics. We will start on the supply side, then we will move to the demand side, and finally we will touch everything that's needed for growth, scaling, and regulation. So let's dive straight into it, because then we have more time for the conversations. So let's start with the supply side. And I would like to ask Valburga to give some initial statements on what's your position on supply, what needs to be done, what are potential issues, what are your perspectives. Valburga, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for having me. It's a real pleasure being here today. Let me just start, before I'm going into the details and the questions you're posing, answering the question of this session, whether hydrogen will be the matchmaker. Yes. So from our perspective, it will be the matchmaker, but at the same time, we also have to be clear that electrification will have to pull us over the line, so to say, if we want to decarbonize Europe. So Eurelectric is expecting some 60% of electrification of our energy sector. We are even expecting more as Solar Power Europe. When going into the details, how to achieve that, and now I'm going to be more concrete on the supply. We have to always bear in mind that supply is not the only element we're looking at, but we have to look at it in an interdependent way, together with demand and together with market growth. So we cannot just discuss in a meaningful way what the color of hydrogen should be and whether renewable hydrogen will be enough. But we will always have to establish what kind of demand we are looking at. So what are the needs? And there are obviously many applications which will be better off with electricity, with electrification, private transport, residential heating, and others. But when it comes to heavy industry, when it comes to shipping, when it comes to aviation, we need to fully decarbonize them, and we need the help of hydrogen. Shipping, aviation, from our perspective, will kick in after 2035, 2040. But there will be, there is industrial demand for renewable hydrogen, which is already there. A study from Material Economics shows 514 terawatt hours demand, potential demand in steel companies, car manufacturers, and others, where in these cases, the use of renewable hydrogen, even with today's costs, would entail only a negligible price increase in the end product. To give you one example, an electric car with renewable hydrogen powered steel would only cost €100 more, negligible. Talking about costs very briefly, this month, Bloomberg New Energy Finance has updated its revision for green hydrogen cost in 2030, 0.8 to $3.4 per kilogram. We can discuss about that later, but that shows we need to really scale up the renewable hydrogen in industrial clusters now. Volumes, I do not hide it. It is a challenge in the near term, and that is not because of the costs or capacity factors. That is simply because of the bottlenecks we are looking at for electricity capacities. The same are true for renewable hydrogen capacities. So we need to have higher renewable targets. We are aiming at 45% by 2030. And we need to deliver on the additional, and I underline it, additional 120 gigawatt wind and solar capacities, which were highlighted in the hydrogen strategy. To give you a flavor, today solar stands at 137 gigawatt installed, so almost what we need in addition. But already in 2024, we will have almost doubled it. So we are really at a very, very steep growth trajectory. We will be adding 30 gigawatt as of 2023 yearly. So we need to remove the bottlenecks, in particular for permitting and grids investment, in order to achieve these volumes we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Valburga. Very interesting, and I think it's a good moment, as a good segue, to hand over to Alfred with a more of a wind perspective. Alfred, could you give your perspective on the supply side, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Wietse, and welcome everybody also from my side. really being a pleasure to be here and to have a good discussion and share my view also with you and the rest of the audience. So indeed, as already mentioned, there will be a brilliant future for hydrogen, focusing on those sectors which are hard to abate and where electrification is not really easy at the end. And I'm pretty convinced that this will overall lead to extremely growing demand for hydrogen. What's also clear is that the first thing to tackle would be the replacement of the already existing grey hydrogen, which is used for feedstocks around various industries. The second one, which is crystal clear, is whenever we talk about the role of hydrogen, it has to be fossil-free for sure. There's no alternative. That's the whole purpose of it. And the only undisputed fossil-free production of hydrogen as of today will be based on renewable assets, being it wind, being it solar, as we just heard from Walburga. But for sure, nuclear might also play a role there, even though a little bit more discussed within various country states. Last but not least, there might be also a chance for and a role for blue hydrogen, at least during a transition period, even though my personal view is that to the extent carbon storage is available, it should be rather than used for capturing and storing residual parts of CO2 emissions somewhere else within the whole energy and industry sphere. So that's going to be how the sourcing of the hydrogen is going to look like for the next years to come. And there's one big advantage, and that's also the main purpose of what we call it in Europe, the energy system integration. All the different sectors, heating industry, power, will further integrate going forward. And what's already crystal clear as of now is that there is a huge demand for flexibility. And electrolyzers will play a corner and a central piece of providing that electricity. I'm convinced those electrolyzers will be then either built at site of our customers, of the industry, or will be built close to the generation sites. Sometimes maybe even offshore without even having a power element in there any longer and just piping the hydrogen right away up to the shore. At the end, that's going to be then a balance and a trade-off between investments to be taken on the powers, on the electric grid side or on the pipeline side, but we will get to that at a later stage when we talk about the infrastructure. Another aspect which David already touched upon is that we can be very happy about, and there's also a requirement to really incentivize now the development of this growing industry. The IPCEI project and program for sure has been a very good contributor for that. However, at the end, similar like on the renewable side, the final aim and target would have to be a fully merchant and fully competitive hydrogen and electrolyzers industry. So at a very early stage, making sure we have the right market design in place in order to facilitate that. A liquid wholesale market may be supported with some certificate markets that will be a paramount instrument. For the time being and at an intermediate stage, ideas like carbon contracts for difference could bridge the gap until those use cases are going to be competitive at the end. And what's also very clear for me is this shouldn't be a regulated business. We should really keep those investments to the merchant market participants and not to the regulated grid operators. Thank you, Wiet.
Thanks, Alfred. Very interesting. I don't know if somebody from the panel would like to add something on it. Perhaps just to throw one stone in the water here. It feels to me there is a bit of controversial discussions around the colors, right? The blue and the green. Should we go straight to green, or is blue an intermediate color where we do apply CCS? And some people will say, well, there's going to be stranded assets. Others will say, well, you need it to scale fast and to create the markets. So, Michael, any perspective on that?
Yes, I think what I would urge is that we move away from the color coding of hydrogen and we talk about whether it's kind of good hydrogen or not good hydrogen. What does good hydrogen look like? It is hydrogen where there are no fugitive methane emissions, which, of course, when it comes from the fossil fuel sector, the worry is that you've got loss of methane before it's turned into hydrogen. And the other thing would be capture of 100% or as near as possible to 100% of the CO2. I think if it can fulfill those two conditions, then I don't see why we should be discriminating against blue hydrogen, hydrogen from fossil fuels. Alfred raises an important point, though. If that then fills up the CCS, the carbon capture capacity, which we will need for things like cement and other parts of the economy that are more difficult to decarbonize process emissions, what I would suggest is what we really need is a liquid market in that CCS capacity. So we need to be using it, and we need the best mechanism known to the economy for allocating that sort of constrained resource is pricing. So if the cement industry needs it more than the hydrogen industry, then it should pay for that. And if the hydrogen industry needs it more, then I don't see any reason why it should be discriminated against.
Thanks, Michael. David, perhaps your perspective?
Yeah. Thank you. I think, I believe that, we should use as much green hydrogen as we can as soon as we can. That's clear, because it's the better outcome from a climate perspective. But I think, as Michael just said, we should be colour agnostic, as I say. In the first instance, blue hydrogen will be better than grey for a period. Yes, we have an issue around stranded assets, and people that invest need to understand that and manage that, but that's their choice in a market. And I agree that unbundling should be key. This shouldn't be a regulated activity. So I think we shouldn't get hung up on it, and we should try and do what we can at every stage to try and decarbonise. But one topic we haven't discussed in the sense of supply from my perspective is we focus very much on Europe as a basin for providing that supply of hydrogen. Now, yes, of course, there are potential basins there. I think Alfred referred to offshore, for example. We're also very interested in the Nordic region. We can see some potential there for a basin for hydrogen that could supply Europe. But I do believe that there's a potential that actually we will have a global commodity with hydrogen. We're already in conversation with people in the Middle East, and those industries are looking at decarbonising and changing, and they have abundant renewable resource in terms of solar power, and they are really thinking about it. And that could create a different dynamic to the one that we're discussing here, which is quite European focused. So there is potential this could move in a different direction, but it would need things like guarantees of origins and these topics to have some confidence that you could work in that way. But I think we shouldn't ignore that part of the supply theme from my perspective.
Thanks, David. Just to build a little bit on that, another big topic is, of course, and Walburga alluded already to it, to the cost reduction that's needed, right, to make it competitive. Because at the end of the day, the technologies are there, but we need a competitive market. We need cost reductions like we have seen in solar and in wind. And part of the cost is the production. Another part of the cost is the transportation, obviously. So it's not completely clear to me if it's going to be economically viable to import it and ship it to Europe or not. But perhaps somebody in the team has an opinion on this. Well, sorry, Mady, you might have a view on it. Please shoot.
Yes, I think there's a link between what David just said and Walburga. What you're now asking is that whether the global developments will depend on what is more cost efficient. So if a global market is has less costs and it can be made with a lower price than that we produce it in this more expensive European system, I think that's also the question that is bothering me. Will it become a global system or not? And will it be a global market? And because in the Netherlands, we are a very, very, very small country, but the politicians are acting as if we all have to do it by ourselves, and we all have to produce the electricity needed for hydrogen. It has also to be done in the North Sea, really over there. And if we want to, we won't get it done. So it's a very strange political discussion within the Dutch boundaries, and then on European Union level. And of course, I think David is very right. The global level should be getting into the discussion with some perspectives or scenarios that what if the global perspective is going to happen due to lower cost than being in a chain on your local or European position. I think that's a very interesting question. Nobody has the answer. The one who has the answer is already very rich, I think. But it's really bothering me because there are also very, very huge political, I'm sorry, I'm a former politician. There are very big political issues coming up from that question. If you believe in a global hydrogen production and transport system, or do you believe in a more local or more regional system because it will be the most cost efficient? Well, that's a question that's bothering me, and it has a lot of impact on maneuvering into the future.
Thanks, Mehdi. Well, you have your political antennas, so I guess that's a fair comment and well noted. Before we move to the next topic, Joachim, I think you would like to add something here as well.
No, just very shortly. I mean, the Commission has become more aware of the strategic vulnerabilities of Europe and our dependencies. And yes, we agree that there is a role for imports, but we think it is also an opportunity. I mean, we shouldn't replace our dependency on foreign supplies of fossil fuels by replacing it to foreign supplies of hydrogen or renewables. I mean, we should have an adequate capacity in Europe with a role for imports.
Thanks, Joachim. So with that, let's shift gears a little bit and move to more, I would say, the demand side of the business, because at the end of the day, the energy transition will need to be demand driven, and the end consumers, whether it's residential or big industries, need to drive this adoption. Michael, may I ask you to share your perspectives on that side of the equation? You're on mute. Yes.
Thank you very much. And we've already touched on some of the aspects of the demand side in the previous discussion. But what I would like to do is just to focus my little intro around two implements. One is a Swiss Army knife and the other is a ladder. And the truth is, yes, hydrogen is a Swiss Army knife. You could use it on the demand side for heating, for transport, it can be used in industry, it can do industrial heating, it can do all sorts of things. However, the fact is that whilst we all use a Swiss Army knife, we don't use the Swiss Army knife for everything that it can do. When we cook, we don't use a Swiss Army knife. When we open a bottle of wine, we generally in the home don't use a Swiss Army knife. If you look at all the things we could do, we use a Swiss Army knife for, frankly, a tiny proportion. And the reason is that it's cheaper and better to do many of the things that a Swiss Army knife could do in a different way. And so when you look at hydrogen, although it can do all these things, we have to be very realistic. As a way of storing power, it has something like a 50% round trip efficiency only. As a way of doing work, you can put it in the most efficient fuel cell, but you're going to get 60% efficiency versus using the electricity directly in an electric motor, which has got almost no losses. If you look at transportation, hydrogen as a way of getting energy from A to B, it's fine if you're using a pipeline, then it can be quite cheap. But if you're talking about using ships, using trucks, using distribution networks, then you're talking about adding dollars per kilo to the price of the resulting hydrogen. So what we're going to be doing is using that hydrogen. Some people have called them hard to abate sectors. It's even more restricted than that. I think it is sectors where you really can't get direct electrification and batteries as a solution. So now let me talk about the ladder. One way that I've tried to think about these things is creating the concept of a ladder, where at the top of the ladder, you've got things that we definitely will be using clean hydrogen for, whether it's green, whether it's blue, we've already spoken about. And that would be replacing the grey hydrogen. Alfred already started off his remarks by talking about using that there's already hydrogen in use. It's in use in fertilizers, it's in use in petrochemicals, it's fossil derived, no abatement. That is absolutely certainly going away. Then you've got to work your way down the ladder. Will we use hydrogen in steel? Probably, but it's not 100% sure, because there is direct reduction and there's a bioelectricity and there are other technologies. Will we use hydrogen perhaps to make e-fuels for aviation? Very likely. For shipping, maybe a little bit less likely. Maybe you're coming down a little bit. Will we use hydrogen to provide resilience on the grid for the 2 weeks when there's no wind in winter? And clearly batteries for 2 weeks of Europe's economy is not going to work. So we've got to have some other solution. And hydrogen looks reasonably promising, not a sure thing, but reasonably promising. And then you get to long distance trucks, hard to do perhaps any other way. Long distance trains, maybe that kind of looks promising, not certain. And then you keep working your way down and you get medium distance trucks. You get things like industrial heating, looks very promising, but actually direct electrification in many cases is much more precise and much more efficient. And then as you get down towards the lower rungs of the ladder, you get to things like urban commercial vehicles, delivery vans, you get to buses, you get to local trains, you get to hydrogen fuel cell cars, and you get to domestic heating. Perhaps domestic heating is one level up from the bottom. It's possible that in some cases it's the only way to do it, but in most cases, electrification, insulation, heat pumps, and so on are just so much more efficient. So that's my kind of ladder on the demand side. And just one final observation about the things that are near the top of the ladder tend to be, or are all, things that you do around hydrogen hubs. They are all industrial type uses. They're not distributed out in the community. So that the consumption of hydrogen is likely to be geographically very concentrated. And that, I think, is relevant as we think about markets and the question that Mehdi raised about will there be a lot of imports? Well, if all you need to do is bring your hydrogen to Rotterdam rather than to get it out into, I'm trying to think of an example in Holland, Naden-Bussum or somewhere like that, into a hydrogen service station, then maybe imports become more likely. And with that, I'll cede the microphone back to our chair.
Thanks, Michael. Very comprehensive, as always. And I like this merit order. So it's going to be interesting what type of mechanism do we need to understand how to navigate the merit order, right? Because I think we need to make some tough choices. You mentioned the industrial clusters, the hubs. Clearly, we see a lot of joint ventures and consortia starting up. So what's holding us further back to really accelerate these type of agendas and break some walls to realize what you're just saying? I don't know. Perhaps Walburga, any comments from your perspective in terms of?
Yeah, from my, so I think the picture you were drawing, Michael, was a very good and nice one. I mean, a Swiss Army knife and the ladder. So that really shows again also what I was mentioning, that we need to focus on the demand. So we should not create artificial markets for hydrogen. We need to focus on the demand which is obvious and which, where you cannot really use electricity. And just because you were also highlighting the infrastructure needs. So we should avoid having stranded assets by building infrastructure for all kinds of different uses, but start with hydrogen hubs indeed. And then, we can always see afterwards if there are other demands which are identified to connect these hubs and to also bring hydrogen to other areas where the market might identify it is interesting to have hydrogen, but we should not start from building infrastructure before we know where the demand is, but rather connect demand centers, have hydrogen valleys. I think that's a very good idea. Have hydrogen valleys and then connect these demand centers. And maybe to just also make a comment to the discussion we had before, I would very much like to underline what Joachim said on looking outside of Europe and looking at global demand and looking into the possibility of importing hydrogen. I do think that in addition to what Joachim mentioned, the dependencies we do not want to replicate. In addition to that, we also want to build up a European economy when it comes to electrolyzers, a European industry. So that's why we should really focus on getting this industry on the ground in Europe before focusing on other supplies coming from countries outside of Europe.
I see David raising his hand. Then
Thank you.
Alfred.
Thank you, Victor. I'll try and keep it short. I mean, I think we shouldn't allow sort of global import and local production to become a polarizing topic in a sense. I think both are needed. Yes, of course, you need security of supply, but Europe is not an island. It operates in a global economy, and I would expect that it would operate like that. So therefore, quite rightly, when you have energy hubs like the Port of Rotterdam, we work there, I would be amazed if the Port of Rotterdam would not be interested in trying to facilitate that, and it would be good for the environment if it did so. So I think that's something that we really need to bear in mind. But actually, the real question on demand for me is, how do you stimulate the demand? How do you convince a user of currently heavy fossil products that moving to a low carbon solution is the right answer? Because if you take a carbon price at the moment, it's fantastic, around 50. But actually, what do you need to move from grey hydrogen? We see studies around 200 to 300 euros. That's not going to stimulate. So therefore, you need other mechanisms on top of those we have now, and we need incentives to encourage the demand side to change, to want to move towards that, because those signals aren't there yet. So when we're talking to industrial customers, they're very interested in it, but it's a long, long way off. They'd actually rather talk about biomass than they would about hydrogen. So somehow we've got to stimulate this demand side, and hopefully the policies can achieve that.
Excellent point, and I'm sure we're going to touch upon that quite quickly with Joachim and Mehdi as well, I hope. But Alfred, I saw you also raising the hand.
Yes, maybe just then adding to what David just mentioned. Exactly, it's about incentives. So it's here and there also some research and development and security about what's going to be the right solution, final solution for the industry. But it's also an economic decision, absolutely. And there is one important incentive just up to be debated again, which is the emissions trading scheme, right? The Green Deal and the accelerated decarbonisation has been clearly stated and confirmed by Europe. But the ETS system, as it looks as of now, won't fulfill those targets. So strengthening that now over the summer, over the course of this year, with a clear perspective until 2030, I think this could be a real good trigger for additional decisions and investments taking on the demand side also.
Yeah, now the demand side is critical, and I think the incentives are critical to, I would say, stimulate the demand to act, because I recognize everything you said. I don't know, Joachim, you might have a perspective on this from a European Commission and mobility perspective, how to create this demand incentivation?
Well, that's one of the things that we're actually considering. Give me some time. I've just joined this job a few weeks ago, but I know that's one. So would it be my turn now to come in, right?
Shoot, go ahead. Yeah, go.
Yeah,
please.
I don't know. I don't know. Were you just inviting me to react to this point, or were you asking me to come in and join would it be my turn to join in?
Please join in.
Yeah, okay. No, I am aware about the need to develop the incentives to buy what are more expensive products right now, and we need to think about that. And as a result of the update of the industrial strategy that we have just adopted yesterday, one of the things that has been decided is that we're going to have decarbonisation pathways where the Commission will sit with industry, in particular the energy intensive industries, which are those that are more needy of hydrogen because of their unabatable characteristics. And that's certainly going to be one of the points of those pathways, is how can you develop the markets to buy the hydrogen based products. Now, onto more general aspects of hydrogen and the Commission. So DG GROW, the department of the Commission that I'm responsible for, which is somewhat of what would be like a ministry of the economy of the European Commission. We're spearheading the Hydrogen Alliance. There's going to be a forum of this alliance in June, where right now, on the 8th of May, we will get all the projects that we're going to have to assess in view of defining the pipeline of projects that will be blessed by the Commission and the Alliance. The first look at this will be at the forum in June. Between June and November, we will have experts looking in more detail into the project so that we would define the project pipeline by November. At the same time, we're busy with the member states and with industry in developing the IPCEIs aimed at fostering hydrogen, at least from a supply side. There are important incentives and subsidies to be given there, and you all know what the IPCEIs are and the conditions for state aid under IPCEIs. At the same time, the Commission is encouraging the member states in the recovery and reform plans that they are submitting now in order to get their post-COVID support soon to have as much projects on hydrogen and greening. As you know, 37% of the national plans have to be on decarbonisation, and a lot of them are on hydrogen, and we are stimulating them to do so. More generally, I mean, because you don't know me and I'm new to this job, from a DG GROW perspective, I think that what we would be interested in particular in view of the Fit for 55 package that the Commission should adopt in July, so we'd be interested to know, and I hereby invite whoever feels interested in this to get in touch with my office to see what are your investment needs and the timings you need to do your investments in the face of a possible institution of a more stringent ETS, the CBAM, and the interplay with the free allowances, and what is compatible with your need to invest on hydrogen or other forms of decarbonisation. And also, I mean, sort of making a public invitation for you to tell me what regulatory changes are needed, in your view, to pave the way for the development of this energy source. On the issue of imports, I've already told you what our feeling is. Yes, there is going to be a role for imports, but we can't be naive, and we need to think about having security of supply, as the CEO of Unipers said. On the color story, I think, yes, the goal is green hydrogen, but we have to accept that there has to be some blue hydrogen along the way. There's simply no renewable capacity at this stage to go for 100% green hydrogen. It's as simple as that. So the end goal is green, but there has to be some blue along the way. On funding and incentives, I mean, there's a wide array of EU, national, regional, and private funding sources available to hydrogen projects. We've got ample sources of funding for different life cycles, stage of hydrogen technologies and solutions embedded in the programming period 2021-2027. There's the European Innovation Fund, there's the Connect Europe facility, transport and energy infrastructure, there's the European Regional Development Fund, the Cohesion Fund, the Just Transition Fund, InvestEU, the EIB, And we will have a dedicated session, because I understand that getting through the maze of all these funding possibilities is difficult. We will have a dedicated session at the June Hydrogen Forum to present the different programs and explain how all they fit together. And back to you. Thank you very much, and sorry for my timing constraints, and thanks for having allowed me to come in nevertheless.
No, thanks to Joachim, and I must say I'm not an expert in funding, but I'm amazed by the amount of funds and the amount of money in the funds. So I'm sure that the whole European industry will be eager to join your invitation. But perhaps maybe just to bridge directly to you from a Dutch energy perspective, if you hear this invitation, what's your perspective on scaling, regulations, funding that are needed to accelerate this hydrogen agenda?
Yes, thank you. Being at the end of the session, it's always hard to add something new, but I think the regulation hasn't been discussed a lot. But before I begin to regulation, I will keep it short also due to time strength. Well, I'm also very impressed about all the funding possibilities. I'm very impressed. I don't know how easy it is to get the funds, but they're there. And that's also a good start. Secondly, in the Netherlands, we are very, very keen on stimulating demand from industries. There's quite a negative atmosphere around huge industries in the Netherlands. We have a lot of them, all very carbonizing, a lot of carbon footprint, or a high carbon footprint, sorry. But still, there are no real good instruments in the Netherlands to stimulate and to scale, because supply and demand are directly connected to each other, of course, especially with this big North Sea in front of us. We are really ambitious about building up on both sides at the same time. So building parks and the industry starting projects to decarbonize. But it's a very huge huge program, I should say, with also the infrastructure coming up as a very big issue, especially not for that we don't get the infrastructure, but will it be there in time before 2030? That are the bigger issues in the Netherlands. Coming up to regulation, regulatory affairs, I have two subjects over there. I think it's time to get a more proper certification system for green solutions, especially also for hydrogen. It needs time to get that thing running, but I think it's very necessary to have a good, strong European Union position on hydrogen if we have a good and proper certification system also for the import side. And on the second, as I said, I will keep it short. I think it is very important that the uncertainties, the regulatory uncertainties that are still there, being hydrogen being not on a regular market, stable system already, there are certain uncertainties like excise duties or, well, the certification thing. So we need more certainties about the whole hydrogen being at the market, knowing that it's not up to the phase that we can do it on our market alone. We need stimulation and we need regulatory aspects to be in a stable perspective. So far, just short.
Thank you, Mehdi. Well, we have only a couple of minutes left, so for everybody that really from the panel that needs to deliver some final messages or requests or shout-outs, this is the moment to do it. So feel free to jump in. Yeah,
I wouldn't mind just adding to something if I may.
Okay. And after we go to Wilburger.
Yeah, absolutely. But just to say that that what Joachim said, he described a toolbox, I think, of different measures to stimulate demand and change, different to the other picture of a Swiss Army knife where you can only use one tool at a time, which is one of its disadvantages. One of those tools in the toolbox, which I don't think was mentioned, was the EU taxonomy. And if you take an agnostic view to this change, then we're clearly still left with an open position on natural gas in Europe in the EU taxonomy. And I really think we need to tackle that, because if we are going to have an impact on, for example, grey hydrogen and these things, 230 terawatt hours per annum in Europe, and tackle it via an agnostic perspective of transitioning to pure green, we need to still encourage the investment in that space without worrying about the stranded assets. That's for the market to worry about, but by managing that. And I think that's something that needs to be resolved soon, from my perspective.
I hear you. Thank you. I'll have to leave you now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joachim. Thank you for joining. We'll continue an additional 5 minutes and speak soon. Thanks again.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
And David, I think you were just in time for your strong message to the European Commission. So
Just managed it. Yeah, thank you.
well done for that. Walburga, you had some comments as well.
Indeed, and I'm just a few seconds too late because I wanted to answer Joachim's question on what it needs. I do think the ETS plays a major role, and even if we look at only 60 euros today, I do think it will become much higher, and there will be a huge interest from industries just because they want to stay cost competitive to look at renewable hydrogen. I already said in my earlier intervention that already today there is a potential for demand with today's cost, and we will see them going down considerably still. Renewable costs are going down considerably. Solar, wind, and electrolyzer costs will dramatically decrease. So it will be interesting for industries to look at it. And again, demand, when it comes to demand, let's please only look at those areas which cannot be decarbonized with electricity. So we also need to focus. And I want to challenge, and unfortunately, that's a couple of seconds late. I want to challenge what Joachim said, that we need to have blue hydrogen in the transition. Because if we concentrate on the demand, which is necessary, I think we can also get there with renewable hydrogen. Thank you.
Thank you, Walburga. So with that, Michael, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think the discussion about how do we incentivize the demand side is the really critical one. If I look at the development of the plans, EU and other countries that have hydrogen strategies, I would give their supply side strategies kind of 7 or 8 out of 10. Their demand side strategies, I'm going to be harsh, 3 or 4 out of 10. And it does come down ultimately to how, what carbon price. If you look at my ladder, the things at the top are going to require lower carbon prices, but to force hydrogen into the things at the bottom would require much higher carbon prices. Just to David's point about the carbon price of a few €100 required, that may be true today with subscale hydrogen electrolysis and so on. I think we're talking about probably more like 100, the figures of sort of 90, 100, maybe 120, in the longer term. But definitely there's a need for extra mechanisms. And so what Joachim was saying is absolutely needed. The caveat that I have is there's an enormous amount of lobbying going on right now down the ladder. And that's because a lot of players in this hydrogen space see that it's going to be very difficult unless the carbon price is 100 or maybe short-term 200, they kind of think that it's very unlikely that they're going to get large-scale use of hydrogen in fertilizer. But there's a lot of political interest in having a hydrogen train or a hydrogen bus or a hydrogen heating experiment. And so what we're seeing is the ladder being sort of turned upside down and almost more lobbying for things down at the bottom of my ladder than where we really need the focus is solving the problems up at the top of the ladder, the hydrogen hubs, the industry, the resilience of the grid, and of course, David's quite right, resolving the role of gas in all of that, whether it's gas for backup or whether it's gas as a source of blue hydrogen.
Thanks, Michael, for pointing out the demand side. I am going to wrap up, but if I'm not going to try to summarize everything that has been said, but I think the Swiss knife and the ladder resonated, and I think what really stands out as well is the demand side. And also in this forum, we are well represented on the supply side, but the demand side is going to drive the change and make the difference. But overall, I think everybody is extremely optimistic on this agenda. There is an enormous amount of money. There's a lot of, I would say, commitment from everybody in the value chain. So that really gives a lot of hope. So I'm sure there will be many more debates, many more conversation. I think also the beauty, by the way, of this is that we're going to see much more collaboration. And so these industrial clusters with supply, demand, infrastructure, all coming together, joint ventures, all kind of consortia being formed. I think we're going to see a complete new DNA of the industry, which is fascinating as well. So with that, I would like to really thank David for hosting and sponsoring this session with Uniper. I would like to thank Alfred for joining, Mehdi for joining. Joachim is already gone, but thanks him as well. And I think it was good to have a bit of a flavor of the European Commission's view. Valburga, thank you. And of course, Michael, thanks a lot for your thoughts. I wish you all a great day and hope to catch up soon. With that, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.